It's Analysing Anfield, your tactics and analytics podcast, courtesy of the Blood Red channel. With Dave Hughes away, you have to put up with me, Guy Clarke in the host seat, with scouting guru Josh Williams showing versatility Jurgen Klopp would be proud of, on hand to give his insight and tactical breakdowns alongside me. Josh, I've seen you playing football, and I think you could probably fit into one of those number 8 positions in the half spaces, but not so sure about the sticks. How you doing?
I'm doing okay, mate, yeah. But I think today I'm actually in my preferred role. I think you're the man to host. Certainly better than I am. So I think we're both in strong roles today.
So what's that, coming in off the flanks? In off the left onto your right? Is that preferred role?
Probably, yeah. I'd say so. A little bit of Luis Diaz, Sadio Mane in me, yeah.
Yeah, nice one. And good you mentioned Luis Diaz. We're going to talk a bit about him. We're going to have a bit of a Carabao Cup flavour to start with and talk about Liverpool landing their first piece of silverware of the season. As you saw with our thumbnail, we are, of course, going to talk about Liverpool's quadruple chances, assess how complete this squad is that Jurgen Klopp has and the depth of it and whether it truly is up to creating footballing history. And finally, before we go, we will touch on West Ham United, and in particular, a certain Jared Bowen, given the links that there have been over him to a move to Anfield in the past. But as ever, keeping up kind of our themes agenda as we do these days on Analysing Anfield. And Josh, then I have to say, let's crack into the Carabao Cup. And what a penalty shootout that was.
It was a crazy penalty shootout, yeah. I must admit, as a supporter, I'm not the biggest fan of them. They are hard to watch, but I was pleasantly surprised when he brought on Kepa, and that ended up being a decisive factor, really. But yeah, I mean, there's been some reports, hasn't there, about I think it's Euro 11 helping out Liverpool's penalty taking, set piece taking, and stuff like that. And certainly based on the level of the penalties, I mean, you know, if that's the help they're giving us, you know, fair play, we'll take it every day of the week.
Yeah, they've been there since pre-season, supposedly, haven't they? As you say, doing the neuroscience, checking out kind of the pressure environments. Layman's like myself would say you can never recreate that pressure of a penalty shootout. But it obviously worked because all 11 putting their penalties away for Liverpool. But I want to get your kind of thoughts on Kepa coming on. As you mentioned it there, obviously you pour into the stats, the detail, the data. Chelsea have clearly done that as well, and it's worked for them in the past with Kepa coming on. But equally, as much as the stats are there, and I'm sure you may even agree with this, you might not, you might point blank refuse. As you and Dave often seem to allude to, the data and stats are there to help support judgment and decisions, not to kind of have blind faith in them. And for me, looking at Edouard Mendy's performance on the day, he was looking unbeatable, and surely that carries some psychological advantage anyway.
Yeah, I agree. I seen after the game that I think specifically Jamie Redknapp was really not in favour of that type of tactical decision. But for me personally, I'm not that against it. I think if it's the right strategic move, you know, make it, even though it's quite a bold call and things like that. I've got no major issues with it. But in this case, I do think it gave Liverpool the upper hand. Obviously, we know all about Kepa since he came to England. He hasn't been particularly great. You know, in his first season in the Premier League, he underperformed post-shot expected goals by 3.4 goals. In his second season, he underperformed by 9.5 goals. And since then, he's barely featured. So those numbers suggest that since he's been in England, really, he's saved shots to a below-average standard. That's not the same as a penalty, but a saving penalty is a little bit of a different skill, I suppose. But he's not shown to be the most intimidating since he came to England. Edouard Mendy had a very, very good game. He's just won a penalty shootout earlier in the month in the African Cup of Nations. So when Kepa did go off, I was pleasantly surprised, and it ended up deciding the game. But yeah, it's not a bad tactical move, but in this case, I think it was.
Yeah, definitely, and it played into Liverpool's advantage. So long may it continue. Certainly, when Chelsea are involved in the rivalry between the two sides in that regard. What about the game itself? Then, of course, a lot made of the amount of disallowed goals within it. But I suppose in recent weeks, the talk around the High Line has come back again, and it was kind of proven exactly why Liverpool perform with that high line that they do. I'll get your thoughts as well on Matip's goal being disallowed, but primarily kind of Liverpool's high line, which Mason Mount, albeit onside, did exploit on a couple of occasions as well. But the disallowed goals make it feel as though Liverpool were kind of living a charmed life, but actually it was the defence doing exactly what it's there to do.
Yeah, it does very much feel like life on the edge with this high line. It's not so much the high line; it's the offside trap. The offside trap's what makes people, on edge, if you like. But it does work a lot of the time. Liverpool kept Chelsea, I think 7 times. I think they caught Chelsea offside during the game. And in the Premier League this season, the most Chelsea have been caught offside in any game has been, I think it was 5. And that was only once. I think everyone else has been max 4 against Chelsea. So Liverpool posted 7. Plenty of goals disallowed on the back of it. So it does make plenty of sense. But then at the same time, I've said before to David, I think if I was an opposition coach, it would be what I would target. It would be what I would try and exploit as an opponent. I think since I've been watching Liverpool under Klopp, up there with the best that I've seen at exploiting it have probably been Brighton.
Yeah, they were immediately who sprung to my mind when you were saying that. I was thinking Brighton do seem to get joy against it.
Yeah, I think Graham Potter seems particularly keen on late runners from midfield who, by the time they've reached Van Dijk, they've already got up ahead of steam, and they can just make that little run in behind before they get caught offside. And Brighton do seem to cause Liverpool issues when it comes to it, but most teams don't. And although it can look like they do, Liverpool is safe more often than not. And in the final, it paid dividends, although it was a nervy watch at times.
What about those occasions? Kind of when Mount got in, and I suppose looking at the data, what does it tell us? Was it kind of as even as it looked? It was a brilliant spectacle, the game in itself. And I mean, you think of the save that Edouard Mendy made from Sadio Mane, also kind of when Mohamed Salah chipped him, was it Thiago Silva sliding back was able to get it away? I mean, it looked as though for all intents and purposes it was a very even game, but how does the data bear it out?
It was. The expected goals was virtually even. It was in and around the 2 for both teams, I think, at the time. And I suppose that is the slight issue with the offside trap is a lot of moves will get cancelled because you're caught offside. But maybe the opposing team will get in once or twice over the course of the match, 90-minute match. And that'll present usually a one-on-one with Alisson Becker. Thankfully, Alisson's very good at dominating those 1v1s. And thankfully, on the day, Mason Mount, for whatever reason, wasn't taking his chances. I was a little bit surprised at that personally. I think he's usually delivers, and he's scored against Liverpool before. But yeah, it was just one of them games where Liverpool got away with it, I suppose. And Liverpool usually generates enough in attack to be able to allow the opposing team to maybe get in once or twice around the offside trap. So yeah, it's a bit of a balancing act, but I've got no issues as long as you execute it well. And I think considering the defenders Liverpool have got at their disposal and the goalkeeper they've got, it makes sense to take these risks.
Yeah, you mentioned by and large it's Alisson Becker behind that defence. Obviously, it's Quinton Kelleher at Wembley, but equally he was more than up to the task. And that save certainly early on from Mason Mount was absolutely fantastic. Let's talk at the other end of the pitch. Then mentioned the Matic goal. We can discuss that, but equally, what about the man Luis Diaz? I mean, have you been surprised with how well he's acclimatised to being at Liverpool? And he's one of those players, isn't he? Watching it just brings sheer joy to you, just watching him, and you can see how much enjoyment he's actually getting himself. You just can't wait for the goals to start flowing. And for me, that's that when, not if. Yeah,
he has made a serious impact. This fella, he looks very, very good. I sent a newsletter out a few weeks ago when Liverpool was signing him, and in the newsletter I put out the pros and the cons of the deal. You know, the risks and the things that should be good, should be okay, and that. But I think I concluded the newsletter at the time with this signing tells us 2 things. It tells us first that Liverpool are super efficient and clinical when they want to be in the market, because we just blew Spurs out the water without even trying by the looks of it. And second, it the way the deal transpired told me that Liverpool were absolutely convinced that this player was very, very, very good, because Liverpool paid, upwards of 50 million for him in January at the end of the window, purely because a rival team, if you like, was trying to get him. So for Liverpool to go and do that, considering what Liverpool's recruitment is like, I said at the time in the newsletter, Liverpool must have been really convinced that this lad was going to be a star. And based on his early performances, he does look very, very good. In this game, he was the best player on the pitch by a mile, I thought. Very, very dangerous, really intense, so direct, can go both ways, strong, energetic, really well suited to Liverpool's 4-3-3 system as a wide left player. So he looks brilliant, and he came on last night in the FA Cup against Norwich, and Lee Dixon was commentating, and Lee Dixon said something like, when he was coming on, Lee Dixon said something like, "Yeah, we're getting fireworks here," and I thought to myself, Diaz has been in the country for 4 weeks, and one of the pundits is already saying he's already expecting fireworks when he comes on the pitch. I thought it just kind of captured the impact he's made since he's come to the country.
You mentioned in there as well. Have you been surprised to me, it doesn't look, obviously he doesn't speak the language. It doesn't look as though he's fully in sync and in tune. And I mean this as a compliment. He doesn't look fully in sync and in tune with exactly, say, the pressing patterns, exactly where he needs to be attacking at the moment. He's got a complete free roll. He's off the leash, because I was expecting him coming in to be quite a disciplined left winger who would cut in onto his right foot, who would attack the far post, much like Sadio Mane. But at times he's popping up on the right wing, he's popping up through the middle, and I actually think it complements Diogo Jota expertly, because Jota's not going to be a like-for-like replacement for Roberto Firmino as a false nine. He plays very much more on the last shoulder, but equally has a tendency and a liking, as he basically played at Wolves, to go out onto the left. And with Diaz, the two of them dovetail and interchange really, really well, which was something I wasn't expecting at all from what kind of had heard and listened to prior to him coming in.
Yeah, well, first of all, the language thing that you've just mentioned, that was one of the cons, at the time. That was another one of the reasons why this is a bit of a risk, and for Liverpool to go and get him for upwards of 50 million in January, despite the fact he didn't even speak English, it was a big statement, that signing, and it's shown that it makes a lot of sense to just go and do it, because he clearly quite clearly looks like a very good player. But in terms of what you've just said there, in terms of he's kind of got a free role, one thing I really love about Liverpool's team, the system that Klopp has established, 4-3-3 every week, is Liverpool have signed players that you can put in a 4-3-3, and without giving any of them a single instruction, it already works. So they already naturally complement each other. Say, for example, if you put a front three on the pitch of Mane, Firmino, Salah, and neither of them know each other, neither of them have said a word to each other, you haven't coached any of them, you haven't told them any tactical instructions, Firmino would still naturally come away from goal into midfield. Salah and Mane would still naturally run in behind and cut inside on their preferred foot. So it just works naturally. And if you look at Van Dijk naturally plays those switches of play, which benefits Salah. Trent naturally plays those switches of play, which benefits, Mane and Robertson at times. So there's just, and Robertson and Trent, specifically Robertson, both naturally overlap, which complements the wide forward when it comes to cutting inside. So it's a system that just naturally works. And if you're signing players who, without any tactical instructions, naturally complement one another, they can just go in and do what Diaz is doing, because it already works. You don't need to work on it as much, because see what I mean? See what I'm getting at?
Yeah, I get what you're getting at, and I suppose the point I'm making as well is you mentioning kind of the front three as we've come to know them: Salah, Firmino, and Mane. Within what they do, there was always defined roles. It was Salah off the right, Mane off the left, Firmino dropping off, and kind of a pincer attack, as it were, from wide, and the fullback stayed offering the real width, with kind of Salah and Mane moving in kind of later into the attacks. But with Jota playing through the middle this season, it's kind of changed. But then with Diaz as well, I mean, since then we've seen Mane playing through the middle even more. Salah equally is getting involved in this interchanging. To me, there seems more now fluidity at the top end of the pitch. And we'll talk about the depth of the squad as well, and maybe in how the number eights are becoming more offensive and more attacking as well, where everyone said for so long to replace Roberto Firmino will be so difficult for Liverpool because of the uniqueness that he offers as a player. But to me, looking at it, there seems to have been a slight structural shift that actually you're not replacing a player, you're changing the system, which benefits and complements the attributes the other players have.
Yeah, I agree. I think in the past couple of seasons, Firmino's essentially been a number 10, really. And Liverpool have almost played kind of like a weird variation of a diamond system with Firmino as a 10 and Salah and Mane as two forwards, really. But because of the 4-3-3 publicity and things like that and traditional tactics, it's not perceived like that. Whereas I think now, when Firmino's not playing and Jota's in his place or Mane's in his place, I think it is more of a three strikers system. It is a little bit different. The central player still drops off and retrieves the ball in number 10 type spaces. But Mane and Jota are just naturally a lot more penetrative than Firmino is. So
saw it against Leeds, didn't you? Where Mane, sorry, just to cut in there, but Mane kept dropping off, but equally he was there to run in behind and win that penalty. And the kind of run Roberto Firmino doesn't offer. Normally it's Mohamed Salah trying to get onto that, but I think it may have even been Salah on that occasion who played the pass, and Mane ran through and was brought down.
Yeah, well, I do think against Leeds it was more of a deliberate ploy considering the man marking scheme. So if you're super fluid in your position and you're sending Leeds players all over the place in terms of what their designated marker is, it can really disrupt their system. But I do think generally, even outside that game, Liverpool's central player in the attack, when it's not been Firmino, I do think those players have rather than dropping into a number 10 space and operating in that little diamond system type thing, I think instead of doing that, they have been combining that with runs and behind. And as I said, it's been more like a three striker system rather than a one or two.
Yeah, definitely. Right, well, we're recording off the back of the win over Norwich City for Jurgen Klopp for the first time to get into the quarterfinals of the FA Cup. So, Josh, our thumbnail depicts it, Jurgen Klopp with all the trophies around him. A lot of talk this week about the quadruple. I know what you're going to say, but are you daring to dream? Can it be done?
I don't know. It's a difficult one, isn't it? It's a difficult one to talk about, especially from an analytical perspective. But when you look at the league table, we're currently 6 points behind Manchester City. So we haven't even. I mean, I know we've got a game in hand, and then we've got to face City. So I know we can make that gap up fairly easily, if you want to put it that way. But the quadruple does seem way off at the minute. It's too early to talk about that for me. But at the same time, I do think it's achievable, and I think Liverpool for the first time have the depth to dominate, really, to win all four trophies at once in a single season, or certainly compete for them all. I think in previous seasons that hasn't really been the case, and as a result of that, Liverpool have kind of sensibly, really, viewed the calendars in a bit of an economical way and targeted the tournaments that matter in terms of status, in terms of reputation, in terms of getting paid. So they've looked at the Premier League and the Champions League, and the resources that have been less quality in the Liverpool squad have been dedicated to the domestic cups. But I think now Liverpool have so much depth that they can target all four without really suffering from a massive drop-off when you're competing in the main two, because the players who are competing in the main two don't have to play that much in the domestic cups for Liverpool to be able to get through now. The Liverpool second strings are really, really good players and probably star for the majority of Premier League teams. If you look at Ibrahim Konate and even Kelleher, Tsimikas, James Milner, Curtis Jones, Firmino or Jota or whoever's the league plays like this, Takumi Minamino, these are really good second string players, and I think it's possible for the quadruple, but I'm not getting carried away this year.
No, it's never been done before, so I wouldn't have expected you to say it is going to happen. But I mean, I'm fascinated by the depth that now has been created within the Liverpool squad, because I mean, you look at the cup final team that initially was named. Obviously, Thiago was meant to be starting, picked up the injury. Thankfully, doesn't look as though that's going to be too long. Could be back for the Inter Milan return game, Jurgen Klopp saying earlier in the week. But that's probably the strongest 11, isn't it? You may argue that Diogo Jota is actually a starter in the strongest 11, but in so many areas across the pitch, and sorry, Kelleher out and Alisson in for him, but you look at so many areas of the squad, and I mean, it underlines it, the fact that Joe Gomez is the fourth choice centre-back, of just how good that is. And it was spoken so much at the beginning of the season about Gini Wijnaldum going and who's going to be the Wijnaldum replacement. And it's kind of Jurgen Klopp being proven right yet again, where in the press conference early on in the season, it was our former colleague James Pearce who asked him, what are you doing about replacing Gini Wijnaldum? And he listed off all the midfielders and said, I've got so many midfielders, I don't need a Wijnaldum replacement. Now, Harvey Elliott, who initially wasn't even going to be on the bench for the Carabao Cup final, has shown what a talent he can be. Curtis Jones continues to make improvements. Naby Keita this season, albeit, he's not always fit, has really impressed me through the course of the campaign. And there is so much depth within that when a player of the de facto strongest 11 drops out, the player coming in is probably equally as good, if not only just a fraction of a drop-off.
Well, what I love about it is Liverpool have achieved the depth that we've all wanted for quite a while, but they've done it in a really patient way, rather than just going and splashing the money and getting two players for every position as quickly as possible. But as a result of that, your second string player might not be a like for like, or you might have to change the system a little bit to accommodate them, type thing. Because Liverpool have been really patient with it, and they've done it over the course of a number of windows. The system now really does have two players for every position, apart from possibly Trent. But other than that, you have, in terms of Mane and Diaz, can both offer very, very similar perks. Robertson and Tsimikas, very, very similar perks. Kanate and Matip, Henderson and Fabinho, Keita and Thiago to an extent, Jones, Elliott. There's so many players who can back up any player, any first teamer who's missing. And I think Liverpool have been able to do that because they've done it over the course of a number of windows and have waited for to get the right players in. Like Liverpool have been linked with a series of players over the past couple of years, and I'm sure they would have helped in terms of depth purposes. But would they be like for like in terms of being very suitable to our 4-3-3 system? And I think doing it over time has allowed Liverpool to get players who are like that. And in terms of the Wijnaldum comment that you've just made, so many people in supporters and all that sort of stuff are so inclined to view transfers as transfer windows in isolation, whereas you need to view it kind of all as one almost. Although you separate the summer and then the winter and then the next summer and then the next winter and things like that, it's all kind of done with the one goal of building a squad. If you see what I mean? And
squad evolution, isn't it?
Exactly. And I think the Liverpool can't just go and get. Well, you can, I suppose, but in my opinion, you can't really just go and get a player who was the right player for you, but he's got 4 years left on his contract. You're gonna. Ian Graham, when I went to see a press conference that he gave, he just straight up said, "Players with long contracts don't move." That was just a simple line that he gave. So Liverpool have got to target these players when the time's right. So say, for example, the time when Lovren left, when Dejan Lovren left the club, we didn't replace him. But the replacement Liverpool had in mind was Ibrahima Konate, but we couldn't get him in that summer. So you don't have to. The question of like, do we get another one now? Do we get an alternative to Konate now? Might not be as good, might not offer as much in terms of the future, or do we wait a year and then get Konate in? And that's what Liverpool did. And in terms of Wijnaldum, I've always thought that the Wijnaldum replacement that in Liverpool's eyes was Thiago, but Thiago was available a year earlier. If you see what I mean. So Thiago played alongside Wijnaldum. People don't view him as a replacement because they played together. So,
I agree with you. I agree with you on that. And listen to, I kind of would take it a step further and say there were two Wijnaldum replacements within the Liverpool squad, both graduated into the team a year early, and those being Curtis Jones, who at the time was seen as Adam Lallana's replacement, and Thiago, because the age profile of Thiago, he's not going to be around for ages. He is only really going to be here for 3-4 seasons, as it were, and offer what he can. And in Curtis Jones, there's a young flair attacking midfield player who has already been hauled back into a midfield role, not too dissimilar to what Gini Wijnaldum had to do when he left Newcastle to come to Liverpool. And yet he's got the tutelage day in, day out, the example being set to watch Jordan Henderson, watch Thiago in training. And as I say, I think last year, I would be amazed if a word of advice didn't go into Curtis Jones of be a sponge and soak up as much information from Gini Wijnaldum as you can prior to his departure. And likewise now, probably looking and checking out how the likes of Henderson and Thiago carry themselves.
Yeah, that's it. That's spot on, mate. I think over the course of a 2-year period, if you look at the key players who may be left in Lovren and Wijnaldum, over 2 years, Liverpool replaced Lovren with Konate and Liverpool replaced Wijnaldum with Thiago and also brought through Curtis Jones and also brought through Harvey Elliott. So, over the period, Liverpool have replaced these players, but it's just, in isolation, windows in isolation, you haven't bought a like-for-like replacement like Liverpool did when Xabi Alonso left, for example, but in the same window we went and bought Alberto Aquilani. Then he's pinned as literally the Alonso replacement, forever in his shadow. Salah was Coutinho's replacement, but because they played together, it's never been talked about like that. But Salah was the third attacker for Liverpool's attack because we knew Coutinho was probably going to leave.
And like you say, it's not replaced them like for like. And I suppose how we'll go back to Roberto Firmino before. I mean, we don't want to just go in a circle. I've got a point that I want to put you, but with Firmino, you don't just go and buy in another false nine because forevermore it's, are you going to live up to what Roberto Firmino can do? Maybe you do alter the attacking shape slightly and you move away from that. Like you say with Coutinho, you move Mane over to the left. You actually bring in another right winger and all of a sudden Coutinho then moves into an attacking half space, which is a luxury for half a season that you can afford. You cash in and then you've got the money to go and build elsewhere in the squad. It's squad building at its absolute finest, and it is a work of art that forever and more Liverpool will look back on, and it is a true golden period that really should be absolutely indulged in and delight should be felt by Liverpool supporters, because it is miraculous kind of the way in which it has been done and how every piece of the jigsaw has fitted and come together as it has. But the question I want to ask you, and when we talk about quadruples, obviously the big one will be the Premier League. Obviously the fans weren't in when it was secured last time, and that's the parade that everybody wants to see, is the Premier League trophy being paraded around Merseyside. But when you look at that and you look at rivals in Manchester City, I would argue now Liverpool have a more complete and deeper squad. Now, Man City, we know, spend millions and millions of pounds for two players in each position. But actually, they've probably, 16, 17 top high-class internationals. But this season, the more and more you look at their bench, the likes of James McAtee, Cole Palmer, Liam Delap, these guys are all on the bench supplementing, having elite players in certain areas of the pitch, and then really relying on very, very inexperienced and younger players. Yes, Liverpool have had Trent come through. They've had Curtis Jones. They've developed Harvey Elliott. But I would say right now, the depth that Liverpool have, the squad is the best in the Premier League. Would you agree?
Yeah, well, it's a big statement, and it's you saying that. I hadn't really thought about it, to be honest, but maybe, on second inspection, you might have a point there. I do think City's core of 15 players maybe is probably slightly stronger than Liverpool's, but I understand what you mean in terms of
if you're going for a quadruple, you need more, don't you?
Exactly. If you're looking at a squad of 25 potentially, then I suppose Liverpool's number 16, number 17, number 18. I suppose Liverpool's are probably stronger. And again, that's City's squad building has stemmed from them being a bit impatient, wanting to dominate immediately. So when Guardiola was appointed, they went and spent 60 million on Mahrez, and they just went and splurged everywhere and things like that. And Liverpool have just allowed a bit more time to get to the same position. But as of right now, if Liverpool was to play City, both squads had total fitness. Liverpool's first 11, in my opinion, would be better, and Liverpool's bench would be probably equally as good, I think. So And I think what you've just been saying there about Liverpool's golden period and how refined the recruitment is, I think that's supporters should really listen to that, because you're coming from an unbiased perspective. You're an Arsenal fan, so this is what Liverpool look like from outside. This is how refined Liverpool are, how squeaky clean the club is when it comes to making the right decisions, making good decisions consistently over and over and over and over again. And when you do that, you can get to this position of dominance. And it just so happens that Liverpool's period has coincided with Pep Guardiola. But if Guardiola was not in this country, Liverpool would be properly sweeping up. Liverpool would have won, maybe the past, apart from last season, obviously, because things happened in terms of injuries, but Liverpool would be on at least probably 2 or 3 Premier Leagues at the minute. They'd be on course for another one this season, and Klopp would be on a fair few more trophies than he's currently got. So I think you're right. Liverpool are dominating at the minute and really making good decisions on and off the pitch.
Yeah, I agree. Equally, I do find it fascinating, Klopp and Guardiola. I think they do push each
I agree,
other.
yeah.
I think you've seen evolutions within Klopp's tactics that have very much come because of Manchester City. And likewise, I think Guardiola, as much as he probably wouldn't admit it, has tweaked and subtly changed his system due to the envious glances he's probably sent towards Anfield, looking at what Jurgen Klopp has done. But as you say, I mean, the recruitment of it, there is rarely a foot put wrong. In fact, I'm struggling to think Naby Keita may well not have played to being the third most expensive player in Liverpool's history, but equally the talent is there, and he certainly more than does a job within the squad. And at the end of the day, that is what we're talking about here, is a squad that has been built. I mean, as you say, not as a Liverpool fan, but I rarely get excited when other Premier League rivals sign a player. But when Luis Diaz arrived, I have to say I was very excited, because due to what you've outlined with everything before, if Liverpool are spending £50 million, if they're doing it mid-season, and this is a guy who's already got international calibre, he's going to be a pretty useful signing, and that's certainly how it played out. Before we go, though, Josh, we best look to the weekend and talk a bit about West Ham United. Of course, we don't really go too thoroughly in depth these days on kind of opposition previews, but it was one game earlier in the season that Liverpool did lose at the London Stadium, so maybe a bit of an axe to grind it in that one. And West Ham this season continuing, I suppose, to surprise a few and continuing in kind of their hunt for a potential top 4 finish.
Yeah, well, myself and Dave did predictions at the start of the season, and I think we did just surprise teams, surprise players, ones to watch, all that sort of stuff. And my tip was West Ham. I did think at the time that maybe go a little bit better, but I was pretty confident he wouldn't drop off. Because if you look at the squad that Moyes has constructed, again, this goes back to recruitment, just making good decisions when it comes to recruitment. And I think Moyes is really, what he's done is he's signed a number of hits in the transfer market, the likes of Ben Rama and Bowen, and players like this,
Souček, Kufal,
yeah, all of these, and then
Craig Dawson,
yeah, and then once you establish this core, and Arsenal have done this as well. Once you establish this core, Arsenal have got this core right now. You just get to a point where you just don't make any mistakes. You don't have to go and start buying 5 players every window now. You've got your core ready. So just don't sign any flops. Just don't make any mistakes, because if you do, you then take 2 steps back. So I think Moyes, he was tempted he tried to sign the likes of Calvin Phillips, for example, in January. Darwin Núñez as well from Benfica. Couldn't get them, so he didn't get anyone else. If you look at Arteta, went and tried to get Vlahovic, couldn't get him. So rather than going and getting someone else, he just decided to wait, because the core's established, everything's fine. Just don't make any mistakes. And I think Liverpool have been great at doing that. But coming up against West Ham this weekend, we are coming up against a team on the rise, and I think they will do well this summer, to be honest, to keep hold of some of their star players, such as Declan Rice and obviously Jared Bowen.
Yeah, let's talk about Jared Bowen a bit then. Before that, just a word on David Moyes. I think he's I think he's proven himself as a Premier League manager at being a really shrewd. His talent ID is very strong, always was at Everton. He didn't have much money to spend and therefore was meticulous in the signings he made. At Manchester United probably wasn't even afforded the time to even get his setup in place for that. And we're not here to talk about Manchester United, so let's leave that. But at West Ham, he really has rediscovered his touch, as it were, and in the transfer market is really where he does operate very, very well. And one trick he has always had, go back to Tim Cahill at Everton or now Jared Bowen at West Ham United, is this ability to pick up players from the Championship in particular and really polish them up and get them going. And Jared Bowen, I mean, talk about him in terms of the ceiling he's now hit. And do you think he's at the peak of his powers, or do you think there's even more that could be eked out? Because Jurgen Klopp's a known admirer of him. Could you see him fitting in at Liverpool should that happen, or do you think it is just admiration from Jurgen Klopp?
No, I could, yeah. I think if you look at Liverpool's system, obviously we've mentioned that Liverpool have got 2 players for every position. They've got like for likes across the board. They don't really have a like for Trent. I suppose Milner can do bits. Nico Williams can do bits, but Trent, you're not really finding a like for like alternative to Trent. And similar, you could say for Salah, because Salah is Liverpool's only left-footed forward. Harvey Elliott has been converted into a midfielder, so he doesn't count really.
Do you think, just on that very quickly, do you think Harvey Elliott has the physicality in terms of, and maybe, obviously he's still a teenager, his body developing, maybe he will find that, but to me, he doesn't have that electric burst that, for example, a Bowen has, and maybe that's why at elite Premier League level, a midfield option suits his attributes better.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I think he's been converted into a midfielder. Because I don't think he's as quick. I don't think he's as much of a threat in behind. And although we think he's a top attacker, I don't think he's obsessed with just delivering, if you know what I mean. I think he's a bit more creative than he is a scorer. So if that's the case, just moving back a little bit from goal, but keeping him in your squad and playing him in midfield rather than your attack. In midfield, the expectation on his shoulders to deliver goals and assists is a little bit lower, but he can still contribute in there. So, but yeah, he's left-footed anyway, so he's playing in midfield. He doesn't really count as a Salah alternative too much. Cade Gordon potentially does, but Cade Gordon's 17, so he's too young. So, despite Diaz's signing, I think if you're looking at 2 players for every position, Liverpool could possibly still do with an alternative left-footed forward to Salah. And Bowen would tick that box. Bowen is left-footed, even though he's very 2-footed as well. Still just 25, and he turned 25 73 days ago. And if you look at his season, I think he's playing. I think he's very, very similar to Jota, because Jota, when he was at Wolves, there was a lot of expectation on the Wolves forwards in terms of not only scoring and assisting, but just doing so much running, so much counter-attack and so much running up the pitch. And I think Bowen's similar. Bowen has to do a lot outside of scoring and assisting. And I think if he was to come to Liverpool, like Jota since he came to Liverpool, where the ball's usually in the attacking half, usually in the final third, he can dedicate more of his energy to just putting the ball in the net. And I think he's got that wide forward profile about him where he can play where Salah plays and score fairly often. I mean, if you look at his numbers over the course of his career, it was pretty obvious that he was going to stick out to Liverpool when you think about it, because as a 20-year-old for Hull, he scored 14 goals in the Championship. Then the following season, he scored 18 goals in the Championship. This is excluding penalties. And the following season after that, he scored 16 in the Championship. And this is all from a wide role. Then he moved to West Ham.
I was going to say that's 16 as well. That was in half a season, though, because he moved mid-season.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
And then he moved to West Ham. And last season, he scored 8. And this season, he scored 8. But I do think if you was to put him in a dominant side like Liverpool, maybe his numbers would move away from the 8 and closer to the whole numbers, scoring, in the teens every season. So I do think he's homegrown as well in English. So homegrown's obviously a nice perk when it comes to a Brexit transfer market. But it just depends on his contract. I think he's contracted for another 3 years. so he could be difficult to land. And I think if Rafinha gets relegated, he also ticks that left-footed box. So, but it depends if Liverpool wants an alternative to Salah, because Salah, out of the historic front three at Liverpool, Salah is the most likely to sign a new deal. Salah's the most driven in terms of wanting to play every single match. Salah's never injured. So maybe Liverpool don't need that left-footed forward as much as, because Mane can play there, Jota can play there. So it just depends whether Liverpool really, really wants two players literally everywhere, or whether they think they can get by with the current front five.
Yeah, no, I suppose as well with kind of I suppose there's been talk as well that Liverpool may need more homegrown players, and obviously that's another one Bowen ticks. But as you say, 3.5 years left on his deal. Only last month, reports coming out that actually West Ham are trying to pin him down to an extension on top of that. So as you say, that would prove very difficult. But I mean, even going forward on that, and mentioning the homegrown thing, you mentioned Kai Gordon. There's Bobby Clarke as well, who's been signed. Liverpool already seem to be having the next phase of the evolution of the squad building, of all of these young players in the squad. Even someone like Mateusz Musolowski, who's in the academy, by the time he reaches 21 will count as a homegrown player who's come through the system and therefore be ticking off that criteria as well. Liverpool aren't going to be boxed into a corner and pinned into Jared Bowen's the only option, it's him or no one. As you say, if Rafinha were to get relegated with Leeds, I'm sure Liverpool are keeping very, very wide eyes on that kind of situation.
Yeah, well, Klopp said in his press conference recently, it's about Liverpool's transfer dealings. He just kind of said it's about signing the right players, but at the right time. And I go back to the point that I made earlier, the long contracts thing. Players on long contracts just don't move. So I think Bowen, he's contracted until 2025. I don't think that's long enough where he fully wouldn't move. I think he could probably be landed, but I'm not sure how much he'd cost if he's got 3 years left on his deal, because usually Liverpool would aim for 2 years left on the deal or less. And I think Rafinha is that. And you could argue Leeds are in a bit of a worse bargaining position than West Ham as well, who are getting European football and things. So, but I do think Bowen is, in terms of profile, I think he's spot on as to what Liverpool tend to go for, and what the type of player that tends to thrive in Liverpool's system. And I think despite Diaz arriving, I do think there's still an opening up there for a left-footed forward, potentially, if Liverpool want to do it.
What about Declan Rice then? Last one we'll talk about before we get off. We'll get a prediction from you before we go as well for the game, albeit we've not really previewed that much. But he is the fulcrum of West Ham. I mean, I, for one, was a bit surprised that he was made such a central figure within the England squad, certainly during the summer and during the Euros. But this season, I have to say, game in game, watching him, he's been absolutely tremendous. And famously, David Moyes has whacked this £100 million price tag on him. Manchester United and Chelsea both very much looking at it. I can't see Liverpool entertaining £100 million on one signing at all. But equally, is he worth the hype? Is he worth the price tag? Like, what have you made of him so far this season? Or is this kind of a Harry Maguire trap too that Manchester United might fall into?
To be honest, I think any player could go down the Harry Maguire route if he goes to Old Trafford, just because of how that club tends to do things. But I do like Rice, I'll be honest, and I think I've in the past 18 months in particular, I've really picked up on his developments as a player. He's a lot better on the ball, seems a lot more mature, a lot more of a leader and things like that.
Gets around the pitch unbelievably as well, doesn't he? I mean, your handle is distance covered. That's basically what it is on the tin for him.
Yeah, well, I was going to say his ability to cover ground is right up there, and sometimes when attacking coaches in particular, they like to have that holding midfielder who can just cover the ground of 2 men essentially. Henderson can kind of do it. Fernandinho could do it under Aris Pomp under Guardiola. Players like Kante, Wilfred Ndidi. When you've got holding players who can really cover ground, Fabinho is actually not as much like that, but when you've got holding players who can cover lots and lots of ground, to an extent you can just empty the midfield and everyone can just kind of go on attack. And I think Rice is a similar skill set to allow his attacking teammates with a platform to just kind of go and do what they want, really. But he is looking like a really good player, and obviously he's well, he's English/Irish. He's one of the two, isn't he? He's homegrown, obviously, which is nice, and he's still only 23, so he could be doing it for the next decade, really. But he's contracted until 2025. It looks like. I think West Ham have an extra year to trigger potentially if they want to take it to 2025. So if he was going to get bought, it would be for astronomical amounts, really, and that just places a lot of pressure on the player. Then will he be getting used properly in a tactical sense by that team, considering they haven't been that refined in the transfer market to pay that much for him? So I don't know. I think we flagged a player a couple of months back called Alan Tchouameni. Liverpool were linked with him, according to David Ornstein. I think that is the perfect example of what Liverpool would usually do compared to what United would usually do. Liverpool would go and get Tchouameni, who's got less of a contract in terms of length, and you could probably get him for, 50 million minus, less than 50 million, something like that. Whereas United would go and get Rice for 80 million plus, and he would probably do slightly less than Tchouameni on the pitch, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So I do like Rice, but if he gets picked up this summer, I'd be curious to see what club's doing that and what the plan is and stuff, because I don't think Liverpool would do it. And usually, based on the past couple of years, if Liverpool wouldn't do it, it's probably a bad move, to be honest. Like when Liverpool went and signed Diaz, the perception in my head of Diaz changed drastically from when Spurs were targeting him to when Liverpool were then linked with him. I thought, okay, I've got to pay attention to this lad then. So,
but I mean, in the summer, Everton were doing all they were trying to move heaven and earth to sign him. I remember thinking at the time, crikey, if they're doing this much, he must be a real player. Then you say Spurs came on the scene, but before that, we'd seen a glimpse of him in the Champions League. I actually thought at Anfield he looked really good on the eye, even in a team that couldn't do all too much in an attacking sense against Liverpool. But yeah, we've come back round to him just because it's such a marvel, the signing, the player, the way in which it was all conducted. And I think the opportunism of Liverpool as well to wait for Spurs to essentially negotiate, be public about their negotiations and say, you told us there was a release clause. Actually, you're doing it at this price. We'll take him then. Thank you. And get the deal done. I mean, it was a masterstroke. But before we go then, I said I'll get a prediction off you for West Ham United's visit to Anfield. What are you thinking, Josh?
I think I'm going to say 2-1, I think. I would like Thiago to play, but I don't think he's going to. And when Thiago doesn't play, I've always got slight concerns about Liverpool's ability to control a match. But I do think Liverpool will have enough in this one, and I think Moyes in particular, coming to Anfield, I think he's a bit too inclined to focus far too much on keeping Liverpool quiet, rather than actually trying to win the game himself. And I think he's actually got the players to potentially do that. But I think he'll be a bit more defensive orientated. So I think Liverpool will win. And yeah, I think it'll be able to 2-1, something like that.
Right, okay, we'll have to wait and see how it does play out. Then I'll, for the record, just say 2-0. I think Liverpool might now just begin to churn out the clean sheets as we do start to hit, I suppose, just prior to kind of the run-in time. I think Liverpool
business end.
Yeah, maybe start laying down a marker or two. But Josh, thoroughly enjoyed your company and looking at Liverpool from a tactical perspective. Thanks for your time, mate.
No, thanks for your time, mate. Solid substitute appearance as usual.
The Divock Origi role rekindled once more. He got an assist against Norwich, so yeah, maybe that was my role today. But anyway, that's all we time for on this edition of Analysing Anfield. Thanks for joining us here on the Blood Red channel. And from myself, Guy Clarke, and Josh Williams, it's bye for now.